Welcome to Mercer Moments in American History. Today is voter fraud, South Carolina in the year 1876. We're going to talk about voter suppression. We're going to talk about voter intimidation. I'm choosing South Carolina because South Carolina is one of the 11 Confederate states who left the Union, who formed the Confederacy over slavery. Make no mistakes. I know historians and textbook writers try to change it. The primary item was that of slavery. And the 11 states had just finally come back into the Union. And this year, 1876, they felt was their chance. If all 11 states stayed together, they could win the presidency. Stay tuned. If you're an African American in the 1870s, it was a wonderful time. Look at what had happened. Lincoln, with the help of Frederick Douglass, had written the Emancipation Proclamation. Suddenly, 180,000 black men who were either former slaves or descendants of slaves said, hey, if we're free, can we decide which flag we want to fight for? Well, sure, which side do you want? Well, one side means a return to slavery. That flag stood for slavery. The other side stood for Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and Lincoln's promise of the 13th Amendment that would forever abolish all slavery. And 180,000 black men said, we're going to choose to fight under the flag of the United States of America because they knew that flag stood for freedom. That's not what they're taught in our colleges and universities today. But I have 180,000 eyewitnesses. And then the 13th Amendment was passed. Sadly, it was ratified, but after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. But then Republicans realized they were in control of the House and Senate that we have a problem because the Democrat Supreme Court, the Dred Scott decision, 7 Democrats against 2 Republicans, the 7 Democrats said, Dred Scott, you're a black man. It did not matter if you were born free or born a slave, became free. You had no civil rights whatsoever, and you had no right to due process to be in a courtroom. So Republicans passed a law, but it was vetoed by Democrat President Andrew Johnson. And the Republicans came back, let's make a constitutional amendment to override the Supreme Court, the worst decision in U.S. history, the Dred Scott decision. And the Republicans passed the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed civil rights and due process to all African Americans. The congressional record says every Democrat member of the U.S. Senate voted no on civil rights and due process for African Americans. Every Democrat member of the U.S. House voted no on the 14th Amendment. It's a matter of public record, not partisan. It's a historical fact. Then they had an election of this Republican, Ulysses S. Grant. The Democrats hated him, and much of the media hated him, but he's the one who won the Civil War. Grant, as president, in his inauguration said, we need to pass a 15th Amendment to our Constitution, guaranteeing black men the right to vote. He was suspicious of the South, what was going on in those 11 states who were trying to get back into the Union. But he felt the black man would be the most loyal American voter. Republicans passed that again, and guess what? Congressional record, every Democrat member of the U.S. Senate voted no on granting black men the right to vote. And every Democrat member of the U.S. House of Representatives voted no. So if you are a black man or a black family in the 1870s, what a wonderful time. Slavery is abolished. You have basic civil rights, the right for due process to appear in a court, and you have the right to vote for African American men. But then came the election of 1876. The Democrats ran the governor of New York, Tilden, against the governor of Ohio, Republican Hayes. Tilden, Democrat, Hayes, Republican. The election of 1876, all 11 Democrat states had come back into the Union under the promise that they would support the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. I'll be very kind. They lied. And if you follow history, you'll see the Jim Crow laws and the Black Code laws and the laws for literacy test. Those are all things put by Democrats in the South in what was called for the next 125 years the solid Democrat South. But that election, they knew that they had to have all 11 states of the South who just entered the Union must vote Democrat, Tilden, to win the presidency. In fact, I have a memo here from October 18th, 1876, from New York. Of course, New York, the state where Tilden was the governor. It's called the Carnival of Blood. Republicans to be massacred at the polls. Oh, by the way, because of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment, everybody knew that these new African-American voters voted almost 100% Republican. In fact, they consider the Republican Party to be the party of the Emancipation Proclamation and the abolition of slavery, the 13th Amendment. They consider Democrats to be the party of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. Let me repeat that. 1870s, African-American voters, some people believe 100% Republican. They believed Republicans to be the party of the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Democrats are the party of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. I have a memo here from October 18th, 1876 from New York. Again, the Democrat Tilden was the governor of New York. It says Republicans to be massacred at the polls. Massacred, a carnival of blood. It talks about how there are 11 southern states, and the chance was now, if we all vote together, we can kick the Republicans out, stop all these reforms, get back in control, have a Democrat in the presidency. And the memo says you have it in your power to rid yourselves of these oppressors, referring to the Republicans and the new black Republicans. It says, drive them with one swoop from the polls. Do not even let them come to the polls, whatever intimidation you can do. And it says, and if necessary, deluge your land with their blood. We're talking about a memo that's promoting violence. Violence. Voter suppression, voter intimidation was not voter ID. It was not proof of citizenship. No, it was violence. This memo was promoting violence against African-American voters, their families, and any whites who would dare support them. It says, if we lose even 2 of the 11 southern states, we will lose the presidency. On the day of the election, November 7th, 1876, evade Grant's minions as much as you can. Stop them all you can. And if necessary, use your unerring bullets to pierce the breast of these carpetbaggers and scalawags, they call them. By the way, what happened in South Carolina, in my belief, it happened in all 11 of the southern Democrat states. Again, they had the promise to uphold these 3 new amendments to become states. Promise to uphold the abolition of slavery, the basic civil rights, the 14th Amendment for African-American families, and the right of black men to vote. They had the promise to uphold that. They promised that. They lied. This is not partisan. This is a political fact. 1876, voter fraud. And the problem was the state census. South Carolina had 74,000 white men over age 21 and 110,000 black men. So the Democrats knew the numbers were impossible. They could not mathematically overcome that. And the Democrats nominated Wade Hampton III, the highest-ranking Confederate officer, to be their candidate for governor. And other Confederate officers filled out the ticket. Democrats sought to intimidate voters. They'd go to Republican gatherings, and wherever you're planning to speak, they created disturbance. They would disrupt Republican speakers with loud shouting and start shaking guns around. And on election day, the Democrats would go to the polls armed to prevent African-American men from voting. And again, it was a majority black population, and there was no way the Democrats could overcome those numbers. But they performed these groups of armed racists. They call them rifle clubs or red shirts, and go to meetings and harass Republicans, not allow a Republican candidate to speak. The red shirts actually killed 6 black men voters in Hamburg, South Carolina. It's called the Hamburg Massacre. Look that up. They killed 6 black men because they wanted to vote Republican. And they were backed by a Confederate general who actually threatened. South Carolina had elected a Republican governor, Chamberlain, and they threatened to assassinate that Republican governor. This is wide open. They're killing African-American voters. They threatened to assassinate the Republican governor. On election day in South Carolina, a town called Edgefield, there were 300 armed red shirts on horses. And they packed the horses side by side by the polls so the African-American voter could not get into the poll. If you wanted to vote, you had to literally crawl under the bellies of 300 horses. The Hamburg Massacre or Hamburg riot was one of just a series of disturbances that were planned and carried out by Democrats in the majority Republican district. The red shirts rode from polling place to polling place to intimidate, to suppress the black voters. And the Democrats had multiple ballots, tissue ballots. They call them repeating ballots, repeaters, where you vote once and you vote again, or you vote a different city or a different county. Even bring Democrats from outside the state of South Carolina come in and vote there too. But with all the voter suppression against black families, by a miracle, Edgefield County Democrats reported 2,000 more votes than it had eligible voters. They suppress and intimidate by murder, by torture, by violence the African-American voters, and somehow they had 2,000 more voters. And then the Democrat Party statewide said that they had won the election, that they had won the election for Tilden, defeated Republican Hayes, and because South Carolina won, Democrat Tilden was now president. And they said, yes, there were 18,000 black men who voted Democrat. They actually said that, 18,000 black men, despite the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of the Constitution, despite all the violence, the torture, the murder of African-American men and their families, that 18,000 black men actually came and voted a Democrat ticket. And you can see why there was an investigation, and obviously that was overturned. 15 people, 5 members of the Supreme Court, 5 U.S. House, 5 U.S. Senate. They went through many states, but South Carolina was so clear, the evidence was so firm. They confirmed the voter fraud, the voter intimidation, the voter suppression. Again, that intimidation, suppression was not voter ID. It was not proof of your citizenship. No, it was terror. It was violence. It was murder of African-American voters, and we forget sometimes any whites who would dare help them. Now, 30 years later, on the floor of the U.S. Senate, a senator from South Carolina named Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman. Tillman had become governor of South Carolina, and back then you appointed your U.S. senators. It wasn't until later we actually elect them. So the legislature, the Democrats had come back in control of South Carolina, appointed Tillman. And they called him Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman. He was one of the leaders of the red shirts in South Carolina, the murders, the violence. He was one of the leaders of voter intimidation, physical violence, torture, lynching, the riots of 1876. And he boasted on the floor of the United States Senate. He was discussing the election of 1876 and said, our platform of our Democrat Party had one plank only. You ready for this? Hold on to your seats. On the floor of the Senate, this is white man's country and white men must govern it. Wow. And speaking of the violence in 1876, he said, under that banner, we went to battle. It was then that we shot them. It was then that we killed them. It was then that we stuffed the ballot boxes. Because this disease needed a strong remedy. My friends, that was South Carolina back in 1876. And again, suppression, voter intimidation, it's not voter ID. It's not proving your citizenship. Who would have a problem with that? Only U.S. citizens should vote. But no. It was members of the Democrat Party who said we must have violence. We did not have the numbers. So we had to go out and kill and suppress and torture. That's the only way they could win the election. And if all 11 states of the South went together, they'd have a Democrat president. But the election committee came in there. They found all the violence, all the voter fraud, the stuffing the ballots, what the Democrats call repeater. See, the Republicans said they had won. And the Democrats said, no, they had won. And Democrats said we had won because 18,000 African-American men voted for the Democrat for president. Think about that. 1876. There were 2 ballots that came in there, or 2 returns. Republicans said, we won South Carolina. We won the U.S. presidency. The Democrats said, no, we won South Carolina. We won the presidency. And they actually had the gall to say, we won because 18,000 African Americans chose to vote Democrat instead of Republican. Now, 2 last things. Back then, the media, and much of it was Democrat controlled, they didn't like the fact that Republican Hayes won over Democrat Tilden. And when they referred to the presidency of Hayes, they called it the Fraudulency. The Fraudulency. And even though the media knew about the voter fraud, they knew about the violence, the massacres, the murders of African-American voters and their families, even though they knew that, they still wanted the Democrat to defeat the Republican for the United States presidency. I got to close with good news. For my friends in South Carolina, I know this is a tough story, but God bless you because you've been able to change all these things. You elected a good, godly man as a United States Senator. His name was Tim Scott. And I hope to meet him one day, shake his hand, and give him a big hug. Oh, I forgot to mention Tim Scott. He's the first African-American United States Senator in the state of South Carolina. It's historic. This is Ken Mercer, Mercer Moments in American History. Today's program was Voter Fraud, South Carolina, 1876. We talked about voter intimidation, voter suppression. I hope today's session blessed you. I know it blessed me. Thank you.